The actions that the government of India took this week are themselves contrary to international law.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Trudeau decided to further destroy our relations with India today by accusing them of violating the Vienna Convention. He was also questioned by reports on hospital bombing the other day and who he thinks carried out that attack.
Let's get into it.
The actions that the government of India took this week are themselves contrary to international law. The government of India decided to unilaterally revoke the diplomatic immunity of 40 Canadian diplomats in India. This is a violation of the Vienna Convention governing diplomacy.
Is it though?
No, it isn't.
From what we could tell, revoking the diplomatic immunity of diplomats is called persona non grata, which, if you recall in our Chinese interference scandal, we've already covered that.
Yep, we've already covered that. But what we didn't cover is the Vienna Convention. So, here's the Vienna Convention, everybody. The Vienna Convention is a 16-page document that was ratified back in 1961. And what this document's purpose essentially is providing a framework and guidance and rules for all kinds of nations all over the planet in how to conduct diplomatic relations with each other, whether it be through diplomats or through treaties. Okay? So, the first thing that Trudeau said is India violated international law and violated the Vienna Convention. That's what I heard. So, let's take a look. This is Article 9 of the Vienna Convention. Article 9 states, the receiving state, meaning the state that is receiving the diplomat, may at any time and without having to explain its decision notify the sending state, the state sending the diplomat, that the head of the mission or any member of the diplomatic staff of the mission is persona non grata, or that any other member of the staff of the mission is not acceptable. In any such case, the sending state shall, as appropriate, either recall the person concerned or terminate his functions with the mission. A person may be declared non grata or not acceptable before arriving in the territory of the receiving state.
So in this case, India is the receiving state and Canada is the sending state.
And you may recall this because this is the exact section that we referenced when we talked about Canada expelling the Chinese diplomat, as Fox said. So, what did India do? Did they violate the Vienna Convention? No, they did not. They invoked it.
Well, I mean, you could argue that they have created a hostile diplomatic environment for Canada and India to continue relations, but they did not break the Vienna Convention.
And they didn't violate international law. What they did is they declared every Canadian diplomat over there persona non grata. That's what they did, is they declared 41 Canadian diplomats over there persona non grata. Now, it's up to Canada to say, all right, come on home, because you probably don't want to be there anymore. They didn't violate anything. And this is a big problem that either Trudeau is lying or doesn't understand what the Vienna Convention even says. But he's probably so used to rules for thee and not for me that he's not used to being on the receiving end of something like this. So I'm thinking he was just so embarrassed by India making him look like a complete ass that this is the tactic he's taking.
Well, and he's counting on Canadians not looking this stuff up and not understanding what's going on.
And not having channels like ours to keep you informed.
This is them choosing to contravene a very fundamental principle of international law and diplomacy. It is something that all countries in the world should be very worried about. And this is putting aside the allegations we made of a serious violation of international law with the alleged killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil that the Indian government could have been involved in. This is a matter, putting that aside, that...
What a guy. So he says, oh, putting aside the incident that I'm going to completely describe so that I get pity points from the international community, but putting that aside. And then he says, oh, well, you know, this is something that everyone should be concerned about. Guy, don't you understand that you're making yourself and Canada the loser on the block? Nobody trusts us. Nobody trusts you. That's why you're not being fed intelligence. That's why you're not being invited to dinners. That's why you're not being invited to announcements. That's why you're not being invited to talks. Nobody trusts you.
Well, we did a video as well on the incident that he's referencing. But the day after Trudeau made this announcement that India allegedly murdered a citizen on Canadian soil, which, as we found out, he wasn't a citizen, not really, his citizenship was in question. But also that the next day when Trudeau was asked about it, he didn't have any evidence. I mean, that's a huge, huge thing to accuse another country of doing. And then to turn around and be like, oh, well, you know, we don't have any evidence. You just have to believe it.
Well, and the problem is then when India was saying WTF, Trudeau then turns around and says, these discussions should be kept behind closed doors. Meanwhile, he was the one making the accusation on the floor of the House during question period. That's when Pierre and Jagmeet first found out about this. And they're still waiting for evidence. So this is beyond ridiculous at this point. And now he's waving around asking all of his buddies that don't like him anymore, hey guys, you shouldn't like this either.
All countries should be concerned about. The government of India decided to cancel, to revoke the diplomatic protections of 40 diplomats working in Canada, working in India. This is something that has far-reaching consequences for the diplomatic world that I know many, many countries are very worried about. But it also has very real impacts on the millions of people who travel back and forth between India, as students, as family members, for weddings, for businesses, for the growing trade ties between our countries. The Indian government is making it unbelievably difficult for life as usual to continue for millions of people in India and in Canada.
He's not wrong there. The CBC released an article today with the headline, "Panic as People Line Up Around the Clock at Brampton's Indian Visa Office." So with India revoking visas for Canadians to travel to India, there's only one piece of ID that will allow citizens, like dual citizens, to travel back and forth. And that's the OCI card, which stands for Overseas Citizens of India. The in-demand ID gives card bearers the right to visit India and stay as long as they like, as many times as they want over the course of their life. It's never been an issue before this. People have always been able to just get a visa and go travel to India, come back to Canada, or vice versa. But with India revoking visas, everybody who wants to go back home to see their family needs this card. So demand is up and offices just cannot handle the demand.
Here's the other thing. This wouldn't have happened if he just didn't come out and brazenly declare this accusation publicly in Parliament. I'm betting that his advisors were shocked that he did that. Because here's the problem. As soon as you do that, in the political chess game, now it's India's move. He probably didn't know it was India's move because he's such a knob, but it's India's move. So they had to do something.
Well, and the other thing is Trudeau's standing there saying, oh, you know, this is concerning for the international community. Buddy, very few countries are on your side. I don't think you realize how much the international community does not like you and therefore thinks less of Canadians.
Well, and here's the other aspect to that. In the story that we ran on this before, we talked about the fact that the United States wasn't happy that Trudeau made that announcement. Why? Because India is going to be the key to maneuvering around China. Okay? So all of the Western states are trying to now increase ties to India to bring them into the fold even more so than they already are. It allows them to decouple from China and move all of those relationships and potential businesses into India. Like that's how they get away from China. Okay? They need India. So Trudeau sitting there saying, oh, everyone's concerned. Who? This is just one of your stupid gaslit statements that you give Canadians. Experts say. How many times have we heard that?
Is it on the bingo card?
I don't think it's on the bingo card. Maybe it'll be added to a new bingo card. I don't know. But that's the problem here, is he just shoots his mouth off and it has real consequences. So yeah, this is a big deal. And you've impacted thousands and thousands, if not millions of people's lives trying to get back and forth through India. You forced them to do something because that was a very serious accusation that you made. So they had to respond. And then you say, oh, this should be kept behind closed doors. Really? Well, you certainly didn't think about that at the time.
And they're doing it by contravening a very basic principle of diplomacy. This is something that should concern everyone, but it's something that has me very concerned for the well-being and happiness of millions of Canadians who trace their origins to the Indian subcontinent.
One thing to note in this whole diatribe he's had, he hasn't called out specifically what they did. He's described what they did, but not the section, not the piece of framework in the Vienna Convention that they violated.
The one that we read.
He's saying, oh, it's basic. Well, if it's so basic, what is it?
Well, but they didn't violate it, and he doesn't want to admit that to Canadians.
I don't think he even knows.
What evidence are you waiting for to see in the hospital explosion in Gaza before you assign responsibility for that incident?
Obviously, the hospital explosion was a terrible, terrible thing. We deplore the loss of civilian life, of innocence. We are working with our allies internationally to make sure that we can determine exactly what happened. The protection of civilian life, whether it's hostages being held by Hamas or civilians in Gaza or elsewhere, needs to be at the forefront of everything we do, not just in the region, but as an international community. And that is what our diplomatic efforts are focused on, whether we're speaking to the leaders of Israel or of the Palestinian Authority, whether it's in my conversations with President Sisi or the Crown Prince of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or any other leaders in the region, the King of Jordan. We are going to continue calling for peace and calling for the protection of all civilian lives.
That's a very peculiar answer, especially for somebody who says that they're working with their international allies. Why is that a peculiar answer? Because our closest ally, the United States, they seem to know who it was 2 days ago.
The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses innocent families in Gaza as human shields, putting their command centers, their weapons, their communications tunnels in residential areas. Palestinian people are suffering greatly as well. We mourn the loss of innocent Palestinian lives like the entire world. I was outraged and saddened by the enormous loss of life yesterday in the hospital in Gaza. Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I grieve I truly grieve for the families who were killed or wounded by this tragedy.
Everything that Biden has seen has come from the Pentagon and the CIA, and no doubt as a result of many of their spy satellites and sources over in Gaza. So 2 days later is today at this press conference, and Trudeau saying he doesn't know. That's where the question came from, everyone. The question was, what evidence are you waiting for? Because your closest ally, who you're supposedly talking to, says they're darn sure that it was an errant rocket by Hamas.
Well, here's my hot take, and this is just speculation, wild speculation at that. I think he doesn't want to say out loud that it was Hamas because he doesn't want to piss off the Muslim population in Canada even more, because they're already pissed off at him with this 1 million person march, which there's going to be one tomorrow. And he's already losing the Muslim vote because of all this SOGI gender identity crap. So I think he's trying to, play the field and sit on the fence, really, and avoid saying what the United States knows to be true, really.
Well, and if that's the case, it just demonstrates, again, what a coward he is as a leader. If the leader of the country is afraid to tell the truth, what precedent does that set for everyone else?